Have you ever felt a vague emptiness in a relationship, as if you're sharing your life with someone, yet still feel alone? No storm rises without dark clouds gathering first, and no betrayal comes without signs. The problem is, most of us choose to look away, because truth, more than lies, demands change, and that hurts. She didn't change overnight. Love doesn't vanish after a single fight. What you're sensing, distance, silence, the feeling of being pushed aside, is not random. It is a pattern of decisive acts, gradual, subtle, but deliberate. Stoicism does not teach us to be suspicious or cynical. It teaches us to see clearly, even when it's unpleasant, and to respond not with pain, but with reason, with a dignity, and with the strength to say, I deserve more than this. 1. Emotional withdrawal, the silent death of connection. There's a painful truth, common enough to break the heart. A woman may still appear in your life each day, yet no longer be truly present with you. She still shares meals, replies to messages, speaks when needed, stays in the same room. But the thread of connection has vanished, silently, without notice. And what makes this dangerous is precisely that. It happens quietly, gradually, without drama, without a clear goodbye. Emotional withdrawal doesn't come after a loud argument, nor does it start with, I don't love you anymore. It slips in like a chill through a cracked door, slow, creeping, imperceptible. You won't feel it right away. You'll just start to notice her gaze doesn't linger. Her smile feels forced. The warmth that once made you feel important, now replaced by polite detachment. The stories you tell receive empty nods. Moments you once awaited now feel like routine, emotionless, indifferent. She still says, yeah, okay, I'm listening, but you're no longer at the center of her world. Physical presence cannot mask emotional absence. And what stings most, you can't point to anything specific that has changed. No obvious betrayal, no third party, no big fight, just you. And a growing loneliness inside a relationship that, on the surface, still seems intact. Psychology calls this emotional detachment, a severing of emotional ties, while the relationship remains outwardly intact. She may still wish you good night, go out with mutual friends, say the necessary things, but it's all a shell. The true connection is gone. When you share your worries, she doesn't ask more, doesn't encourage, no longer meets you where you are. When you speak of joy, she smiles faintly and changes the subject. You're speaking to a polite version of her, a robot with manners, but no longer fully there. Emotion cannot be hidden forever. One may feign care, but not connection. She may fulfill the role of partner or wife, but once emotional energy is withdrawn, even familiar gestures feel hollow and mechanical. That absence doesn't roar, it erodes, quietly, daily, until you begin to doubt yourself. Did I do something wrong? Am I no longer enough? Is this just a passing phase? Many men choose to rationalize what they feel. They silence their instincts, afraid of confronting truth. They say, she's just busy. Maybe it's work stress. She's still here. Everything's fine. Oh, but instinct, the most primal sense, is rarely wrong. We feel the shift not because we're weak, but because emotional connection is more honest than words. And when emotions move, they always signal. The only question is, do we have the courage to listen? What makes emotional withdrawal so cruel is that it leaves no evidence. You can't say she betrayed you. You can't say she's wrong. Everything looks fine. yet you no longer feel seen, heard, or truly alive in her presence. And that, in time, can hurt more than outright betrayal. A relationship doesn't die when someone cheats. It begins to die the day you're no longer fully present in the other's inner world, even if they're still right in front of you. Emotion doesn't disappear overnight. It isn't a switch. It shifts, pulls away from here, and quietly moves elsewhere, like an underground current that leaves the surface calm. A woman may not say she's changed, but her behavior, her reactions, her tone, they all evolve. She's still there, still calls you lover, husband, still plays the role. But the core emotion, once binding, no longer moves toward you. When emotion changes course, the first casualty is spontaneity. What once made her laugh now earns blank stares. Your care is met not with warmth, but curt replies. When you try to share, she doesn't lean in. She offers silence, avoidance, or impatience. This isn't your fault. It's a sign that her emotional attention has shifted to a place where you no longer exist. Affection is emotional capital, and like any investment, once withdrawn from here, it often seeks another place. In many cases, this shift isn't due to another person. Sometimes, it's a new space, a new group, a potential connection not yet formed, but already drawing her energy and spirit. And once she's emotionally invested elsewhere, you inevitably become a familiar stranger in your own love story. What complicates this further is how we respond. Upon sensing her retreat, many men don't confront. They overcompensate. They buy gifts, send more texts, ask more questions, even change themselves to meet new expectations no longer within their control. That's when the relationship turns one-sided. One saves, the other drifts, silently, without explanation. As emotion shifts, imbalance follows. You feel you're too much, too loving, too attentive, too anxious, while she seemed too little. The problem isn't quantity, but gravity. What once revolved around you now orbits elsewhere, and your efforts, though sincere, become pressure, even repellent. Your concern is seen as control, your gifts as compensation. Everything you do to hold her is misread, because emotionally, she's already let go. And so the spiral begins. The colder she becomes, the harder you try. The harder you try, the more distant she grows. Not because you're inadequate, but because you're clinging to a version of her that no longer exists. You don't see it yet, but the woman you're trying to keep is not the one who once loved you. She's changed, not in name or appearance, but in her inner connection to you. A key element in emotional detachment is ambiguity. The one retreating rarely states it. They keep the relationship as a backup, out of guilt or uncertainty about new directions. This leaves the other, you, in limbo, unsure whether to hold on or let go, unclear of your place on her emotional map. Once emotion moves on, even if the relationship remains outwardly intact, it's already dead within. Old promises, cherished memories, they become one-sided echoes. She might still call you lover, but the voice carries no connection. She may still text good night, but the words are duty, not devotion. Sadly, many realize this too late. They keep investing in a relationship already emptied, believing love can rekindle what once was. But emotion doesn't return where it no longer wants to reside. And the harsh truth is this: you can love someone completely, but you cannot force them to feel the same once their heart has long since withdrawn. 2. Sudden privacy. When the phone becomes a fortress. In any relationship founded on sincerity and trust, the use of a phone, despite being a personal object, typically unfolds naturally, without layers of defense. No one pays much attention to who's holding it or who's texting whom, because the trust is strong enough to render such concerns irrelevant. You might ask your partner to look up directions, reply to an urgent message, or simply watch a funny video together. These acts don't provoke anxiety or the need to hide anything. But as emotions begin to shift, so does the behavior around the phone. Quietly, yet unmistakably. The first noticeable change is sudden closeness to the device. Where she once left it on the table, charged it across the room, or even forgot where it was, now the phone stays physically attached to her. It's always within reach, even when she leaves the room for just a moment. Even while showering, sleeping, or stepping onto the balcony, the phone goes with her, an unspoken reflex. Next comes the way the phone is placed, no longer face up, signaling nothing to hide, but now face down, instantly locked, silenced, or with notifications turned off. When messages arrive, she glances quickly, brushes them off, or turns away to shield the screen. These seemingly minor gestures are symptoms of a deeper psychological shift, conscious self-protection. She's drawing a new boundary you once had access to, but now are quietly excluded from. In the early stages, these changes might slip by unnoticed, or you may tell yourself, everyone has a right to privacy. That's true, until privacy begins to look like defense. If you happen to touch her phone, say, handing it over from one room to another, you might notice a sudden tension, an intense stare, a raised voice, or questions like, "Why are you touching my phone?" Once, such interactions were harmless between you. Now they trigger discomfort, not because you invaded her privacy, but because she no longer wants to share that space. Another common signal is proactive defensiveness. Even before you ask, she may say, "Why are you looking at my phone?" Or, "I have private matters that don't need explaining." These aren't direct responses to your actions. They're internal defenses. Deep down, she senses her behavior has shifted and may be questioned. Rather than opening up, she constructs a zone of safety through high alert, turning the phone into a fortress no one may enter. This change in phone behavior rarely stands alone. It's often accompanied by other emotional shifts: indifference, detachment in conversation, and a growing sense of invisibility in the relationship. The phone isn't just hiding messages, it's guarding a flow of information, as if she's now living a parallel life in which you're no longer central. There may not be a clear act of betrayal, but what is clear is that trust, the cornerstone of any relationship, is quietly eroding. What's striking is how all these changes occur without explanation. She doesn't say, "I need more space," nor does she share why she's becoming guarded. Instead, the shift is silent, just enough for you to feel that something's off, but not enough to declare it outright. This ambiguity breeds prolonged unease. You sense you're being shut out from part of her life, yet you can't confront it because everything still appears normal on the surface. When a relationship moves from openness to secrecy, from ease to vigilance, from trust to defense, then the shift in phone behavior is no longer a minor detail. It becomes a warning sign, not necessarily of immediate betrayal, but of a withdrawal unfolding step by step, action by action, habit by habit. When a phone once shared becomes a no-go zone guarded by suspicion, the relationship has entered a stage where emotion no longer resides where it once did. In the digital age, where phones, social media, and messaging apps are integral to daily life, how one uses these tools reflects their emotional openness or closure within a relationship. The lack of digital transparency isn't just about privacy. It's tangible evidence of emotional disconnection, especially when secrecy is intentional and recurring. In the early, healthy stages of a relationship, sharing flows effortlessly. You speak freely of friends, conversations, social content, even capture memories together. None of it feels intrusive because there's nothing to hide. Every digital interaction feels open, not performative, but genuine, because there's no reason for concealment. Yet as feelings drift away from the relationship, digital behaviors begin to mirror that shift. Once frequent sharing fades, she no longer mentions new friends, recent chats with coworkers, or amusing messages. Your presence in her digital world begins to dim. Posts once tagged with your name vanish or become private. Photos of the two of you disappear. Even small public interactions, likes, comments, grow sparse, then stop altogether. The shift becomes clearest when you ask about it. A simple question like, "Who just messaged you?" may be taken as intrusion. She may overreact, show annoyance, or deflect the topic. The usual reasons are personal matters, private stuff, or you don't need to know everything. But the real difference lies in context. What once was private without exclusion is now used as a barrier, especially when accompanied by a guarded attitude. A more troubling sign is the blurring of information boundaries. She may use apps that auto-delete messages, rename contacts, clear call logs, or create secondary accounts to maintain hidden communication. Not every case means betrayal, but creating digital gray zones is often a miniature version of emotional separation. When someone no longer wants you to know what they're doing online, they likely no longer want you fully present in their inner life. This emotional divide becomes more obvious when inconsistencies appear. She says she's been offline all day, yet you see a constant digital trail. Or you stumble upon a conversation you were never told about, even with an old friend, that was deliberately hidden. The explanation may sound reasonable, but the exclusion hurts. You no longer feel like a partner building a shared life, but someone left on the periphery. This isn't just emotionally painful. It creates a fog of communication where even minor doubts can crack the foundation if left unaddressed. Once trust is weakened, any digital behavior tinged with secrecy invites misinterpretation. And sadly, the one withdrawing rarely chooses honesty or clarity, but opts for silence or deflection, leaving the other person in spirals of doubt, second-guessing, and emotional fatigue. Digital opacity, especially in a fraying relationship, isn't merely about phones or online habits. It's a signal. The divide has moved beyond emotion and now touches even once shared personal spaces. The other person hasn't just withdrawn in spirit. They've removed you from their digital world, where most modern connections live. When someone no longer wants you to know who they're talking to, what they're thinking, or what they care about online, chances are you're no longer inside their emotional circle. 3. Creating conflict as a strategy for withdrawal. In intimate relationships, conflict is inevitable, but not all conflicts arise from the same root. Some emerge from genuine differences in needs, expectations, or values. Others, however, are quietly and deliberately manufactured, not to resolve anything, but to push the relationship to the brink. One hallmark of this stage is when one person begins to magnify trivial matters, things once overlooked, forgiven, or handled gently, into sources of tension and blame. At the beginning of a relationship, both partners tend to be more tolerant of differences in routines, habits, or personalities. Forgetting to take out the trash, replying late to a message, or missing a small detail in a conversation doesn't darken the mood. But when feelings begin to shift, these small oversights are suddenly recast as signs of neglect, thoughtlessness, or even absence of love. A simple act, like forgetting to reply to a message, which was once easily excused as a busy day, is now condemned as intentional disregard, as disrespect. Not doing the dishes, previously considered a flexible, shared chore, now triggers accusations of laziness, irresponsibility, or failure to contribute. Such episodes become more frequent, more intense, leaving the other person confused, unsure. Is this really that serious? On the surface, these are disputes about behavior, but beneath, they reveal a deeper shift in how the relationship is perceived. Once someone begins to emotionally withdraw, they no longer view their partner through a lens of grace. Every action, no matter how minor, is scrutinized and loaded with negative intent. A mistake is no longer a mistake, but evidence of fatigue, disrespect, or rationale to create distance. In psychology, this is known as justification bias, the tendency to seek reasons that rationalize a feeling already in place. When the desire to leave has begun to take root, every action of the other becomes ammunition to support that decision. She no longer feels connected or inspired, but lacking the courage or a legitimate reason to leave. She weaponizes small conflicts to build an internal narrative that she tried, that he wouldn't change, that the relationship brought her pain. What's telling is that these tensions come without a sincere desire to resolve them. There's no sitting down for meaningful dialogue, no joint effort to improve, only a heavy atmosphere, a feeling of one-sided blame, and a nameless dissatisfaction that defies explanation. When asked, "Are you really upset about that?" the answer is often, "It's not just about that." A sign that what's visible no longer reflects what lies beneath. This produces a troubling psychological effect. The other person begins to feel like the problem, though they don't know why. They try to adjust, to do better, to ease the tension. But no matter what they do, conflict continues, not because they are wrong, but because the purpose of the conflict is no longer resolution, but exit. Over time, this dynamic leads one to question themselves, to believe they are to blame for the relationship's decline. In truth, this is a process triggered when one partner has emotionally detached and is using conflict to bring the relationship to a close, without having to say so directly. In sum, manufacturing tension from minor things isn't just a symptom of breakdown. It's a strategy of emotional control. When connection is replaced by dissatisfaction, the withdrawing partner may use conflict to guide the relationship toward an ending they've already rehearsed. Whether the other person realizes it or not, they are slowly being pushed from a place they once belonged, not through sudden departure, but through repeated, inescapable reproach. In many breakups, the person who leaves isn't always the one who speaks first. Sometimes the separation is the result of a quiet strategy where one has long ceased wanting to stay, but lacks the clarity, courage, or initiative to end it openly. Instead, they choose a passive path, building emotional pressure, sowing disappointment and discord, wearing the other down until they choose to walk away. A breakup not by words, but by erosion, leaving the most wounded one to take the final step. This strategy often begins with subtle shifts in daily behavior. The gestures of care that once came naturally begin to fade. In their place, indifference, minimal interaction, little listening. When you initiate conversation, you're met with short, dismissive, or flat replies. When you share emotions, they deflect or go silent. Interaction becomes misaligned. One reaches out, the other merely maintains appearances. A clearer sign of this withdrawal is the repeated failure of communication. Every conversation, no matter how casual, risks becoming a trigger. Topics once discussed freely are now avoided or met with harsh reaction. Even constructive feedback is seen as attack. Attempts to explain or de-escalate are ignored. Eventually, you fall into communicative paralysis. No words seem to restore the connection once felt. Alongside this breakdown, the withdrawing partner often begins to erode your emotional confidence. This is done through repeated criticism, negative judgments, or subtle comparisons. Phrases like, "You don't know how to care like others do," or "I don't feel like myself around you," or "You always make everything heavier," cut deep. They don't just hurt, they destabilize your sense of worth. You begin to question whether you love well, behave rightly, or even deserve to be loved. This unraveling happens in silence, not through visible betrayal or outright rejection, but through a drip of daily slights. A little coldness each day, a weekly moment that makes you feel not enough. Each argument followed by an unexplained step back. All of it accumulates, not to repair the bond, but to create an emotional climate so suffocating you're forced to let go, as an act of self-preservation. One defining sign in this phase is the outright rejection of reconciliation. Even the simplest gestures suggest going out to ease the tension, and they decline. Propose an honest conversation, and they postpone or dodge. Write a heartfelt message, and they reply with a single word, or leave it on seen. Not because they don't understand your effort, but because they no longer wish to receive it. Your every attempt becomes a burden. Their silence becomes a wall. Eventually, after many attempts, you lose emotional direction. You no longer know your place in the relationship. You receive no affirmation, no hope. It begins to feel like a battle fought alone, against someone who's already withdrawn in spirit. And in that exhaustion, you stop. Not because love has died, but because you can no longer carry it alone. By that point, the one who speaks the breakup aloud is often the one who has endured more. Yet to the other, the one who crafted this silent exit, it appears as proof. I was abandoned. I wasn't loved properly. Thus, they achieve both goals: to end the relationship and to remain on morally safe ground. A way to avoid emotional accountability without ever saying a word. In conclusion, the strategy of pushing someone to the brink so they initiate the breakup is not a spontaneous act. It is a deliberate psychological process. It rests on emotional control, the breakdown of dialogue, and a slow dismantling of connection, crafted to avoid the consequences of honesty. The withdrawing person never has to admit the shift within them. never faces the burden of ending things directly. They simply push the other toward an emotional edge until leaving is the only path that remains. 4. I need time for myself. But in truth, it's for someone else. In a relationship quietly unraveling, the phrase, "I need time for myself," often marks the beginning of a profound emotional and relational shift. Linguistically, it seems harmless, even civilized. It carries no accusation, no criticism, and avoids direct tension. Yet, in the context of a cooling relationship, it's not just a polite pause for rest, but the first sign of a deliberate emotional retreat. This stage often begins with small but recurring behaviors that increase in frequency. The other person starts to decline meetings that used to be routine. Conversations grow shorter, lack depth, and lose initiative. They often cite being busy, tired, needing space, or wanting time to focus on themselves. Though the reasons seem valid, emotionally, you begin to feel your presence diminishing, not due to circumstance, but by their willful intent. At this point, needing space no longer means creating a healthy pause to renew the bond. Instead, it becomes a tool to reduce interaction, loosen attachment, and limit emotional responsibility. They are no longer there when you need someone to confide in. Familiar habits like nightly good nights, morning check-ins, or casual conversations begin to disappear. The separation doesn't come through confrontation, but through absence, making it hard to tell if this is temporary change or a quiet exit. You'll also notice that their alone time becomes increasingly protected and off-limits. They spend more time on their own, yet offer no clarity about what they're doing, where they are, or who they're with. What used to be casually shared now becomes private, no longer needing explanation. Simple questions like, "Where are you going today?" or "What's your plan for the weekend?" are treated as intrusions. This marks a shift in your access to information. You're no longer at the center of their world. A psychological factor, often tied to needing space, is the desire to control the exit without facing confrontation. The one who says it may claim to be reassessing their feelings, at least on the surface. But in truth, in many cases, they've already made an internal emotional decision. They no longer feel enough connection to continue, yet they're not ready to end things outright. So, spice becomes a way to slowly minimize your influence, preparing them to move on without a direct break. This phase often leaves the other partner confused, with no clear breakup, no heated argument, no explicit rejection. It's easy to fall into waiting, hoping, and trying harder to win them back. But this ambiguity only prolongs and deepens the fracture. You begin to doubt yourself, believing you're the reason they needed distance, trying to change your behavior to prove you're still worthy. But in truth, the one creating the distance is rarely waiting for you to change. They are preparing for a departure that hurts them least. In many cases, space serves as a moral shield, allowing the person to maintain a positive self-image. They don't break up, lash out, or spark conflict, but they also stop emotionally investing. They remain in the relationship in name, while their actions have already detached. This spares them guilt, because on the surface, they're just needing time. But for the other person, the ambiguity creates chronic unease, uncertain whether to wait or let go. In essence, when "I need space" arises amid a noticeable decline in emotional connection, it's likely the first step in a deliberate retreat. Its purpose is not healing, but distance, clearing a safe path toward eventual departure. Without clear recognition, the remaining partner may fall into the loop of holding on, when in reality, they've been emotionally removed long ago. In the emotional decline of a relationship, those seeking to withdraw rarely offer direct reasons like, "I no longer love you," or "I want to break up." Instead, they turn to positive, hard-to-refute concepts. Most commonly, "I want to work on myself." On the surface, it's a reasonable, respectful, inward-focused statement that seems neutral. But when placed in the context of emotional distancing, it often reflects a deliberate redirection, not just withdrawing from the current relationship, but quietly making space for a new emotional attachment. The phrase personal growth is often understood as improving skills, mindset, health, or life purpose. In a healthy relationship, personal growth is supported and mutually encouraged. But when this becomes a reason to withdraw from emotional interaction and romantic responsibility, it no longer serves self-improvement. It becomes a shield used to justify removing the other person from one's personal orbit. In practice, this redefining unfolds systematically. The partner begins restructuring their schedule, adjusting how they use time, and cutting back on shared activities. Weekends together become workshops, study groups, fitness classes, or social events where you're no longer included. Conversations once daily are replaced by quiet time for reflection, or hours set aside for reading, writing, meditating. The change doesn't stem from your wrongdoing, but from their decision to design a new life in which your presence is no longer necessary. A telling sign of this is the decline in sharing personal details. Where you once heard everything, the day's highlights, what a coworker said, what they learned, how they felt, now those stories shrink, become selective, or vanish. If you probe, they reply, "I just want to keep a little to myself," or "This is an inner journey. I'm not ready to share." On the surface, these answers are valid, but emotionally, they mark the rise of a private ecosystem where you're no longer a participant, only an outside observer. This detachment extends beyond actions. It shapes language and thought. Familiar phrases like "we should," "let's do," fade, replaced by "I need," "I want," "I think." The shift from "we" to "I" seems small, but it reveals a redefinition of your role. From companion, you become a bystander to their journey of self-growth. Notably, this phase often coincides with the quiet emergence of a new emotional anchor. It may be a new friend, a coworker in a self-improvement group, or an idealized figure met in new communities or classes. This connection doesn't have to be romantic, but it begins absorbing the attention and emotional energy that once belonged to you. When someone starts confiding in another, seeking understanding elsewhere rather than within the relationship, it's a clear sign that feelings have shifted. This new emotional anchor, though temporary, creates unspoken comparison. The values, ideas, and lifestyle absorbed from the new environment become a new standard against which your relationship is measured. If you don't keep pace with the change, you're perceived as an obstacle. Subtle conflict arises. You're misunderstood, seen as unsupportive, or labeled as lacking drive. Though still a partner in name, you are slowly positioned as an outsider to their evolution, and that imbalance strains the relationship. Overall, Redefining personal growth as a veil for emotional redirection doesn't happen loudly or clearly. It begins with small shifts, a new schedule, fewer shared details, a change in language. Then, it alters the space between you, from intimate to independent, from shared to separate. By the time the process is complete, you may find yourself quietly removed from their life. No breakup speech, no argument, just a smooth exit crafted through altered words, new routines, and a changed way of loving. 5. Gaslighting, the subtle art of making you doubt yourself. Gaslighting is a subtle form of psychological manipulation in which the perpetrator deliberately causes the other person to doubt their own emotions, thoughts, memories, and even sanity. The term comes from a play, and later the film Gaslight, 1944, where a husband tries to drive his wife insane by persistently denying reality. In the context of a deteriorating relationship, gaslighting doesn't unfold with theatrical drama, but through small, repeated patterns, no less dangerous, where one person consistently invalidates the other's reasonable feelings, turning the injured into the one at fault. This process begins in seemingly ordinary moments of communication. One person senses something has shifted: emotional distance, coldness, reduced connection, or growing ambiguity. When they speak up, not to accuse, but to express concern and a desire to reconnect, they're shut down with statements like, "You're overthinking again." With this kind of negativity, "How can we live together?" or "You're always trying to control." This is exhausting. These responses don't address the issue, but redirect the blame, causing the one who raised the question to begin doubting their own emotional compass. Gaslighting is difficult to recognize at first. It doesn't come with obvious attacks, shouting, or crude insults. Instead, it hides beneath reason, beneath so-called reality, often cloaked in the phrase, "I'm saying this for your own good." This makes the manipulated feel as though they're unstable, overly sensitive, the ones making things complicated. They begin to silence themselves, suppress their emotions, and lose faith in the very intuition that once guided them with clarity. When this behavior repeats, the victim enters a dangerous psychological cycle. From suspecting the other, to speaking up for their feelings, to being dismissed or mocked, to doubting themselves, to silence. And when this cycle repeats long enough, they not only lose their voice, but start accepting the version of reality imposed upon them. They begin believing they're too sensitive, too controlling, or even the root cause of the relationship's cracks. At that point, the victim has been reprogrammed in how they perceive themselves. Instead of trusting their own emotions, they believe the feedback of the manipulator, even when it's untrue. Instead of trusting their intuition that something is wrong, they convince themselves they're simply not mature enough to love properly. The injury now lies not only in ignored emotion, but in the erosion of their capacity to define truth and self-worth. What's most dangerous is that gaslighting rarely stands alone. It's often reinforced with sweet words, laced between criticisms, superficial care to mislead perception, or compensatory gestures that cloud emotional clarity. The victim enters a state of internal contradiction. Their inner sense signals something is off, but the words and actions they receive insist everything is fine. In such confusion, instinct falters, and silence is chosen as a way to maintain an illusion of stability. One of the gravest outcomes of prolonged gaslighting is the erosion of self-respect. When someone's emotions, perceptions, and views are repeatedly invalidated, they lose belief in their ability to positively contribute to the relationship. They become hesitant to speak, afraid of making mistakes, reluctant to express opinions. The relationship no longer functions as a bond between two equals. It becomes a structure of imbalance, where one defines right and wrong, and the other adjusts, submits, conforms. Gaslighting also traps its victims in the relationship by dismantling their confidence in judgment. They fear that if they leave, they'll be the one to blame. They worry they're abandoning something that was fine all along, just because they were too suspicious. This psychological uncertainty makes separation harder, even when the emotional damage has long been done. In short, gaslighting, by reframing reasonable emotions as irrational reactions, is a slow but deep form of manipulation. It corrodes the victim's ability to define their own emotions, turning them from the one identifying the issue into the one blamed for it. When someone begins to ask, "Am I just imagining things?" or "Am I doing something wrong?" unable to trust their initial emotional clarity, gaslighting has already taken hold. Gaslighting is not just about denying another's feelings. When sustained and systematized in intimate relationships, it becomes a reality-bending strategy in which the one causing the harm avoids responsibility by reversing roles and positioning the other as the cause. This mechanism grants the manipulator control without consequence, shielding their moral image while framing themselves as the one who's been hurt. This tactic often begins in ordinary conversations, where the manipulated partner raises fair concerns about unusual behavior. For instance, they notice emotional distance, evasiveness, or secrecy with phones or social media, and instinctively ask gentle questions or seek clarity. But instead of receiving honest replies, they're labeled as controlling, untrusting, or emotionally suffocating. The most common tactic is deflection. When you say, "Lately you don't share with me like before," instead of a dialogue, the response might be, "Why are you always suspicious of me?" Or, "You're suffocating me by not giving me space." What begins as a valid emotional observation is reframed as your fault. This not only interrupts communication, but builds a new reality, one where the questioner becomes the source of tension and the avoidant partner plays the victim. This role reversal is not a misunderstanding. It's a repetitive strategy used to create an altered version of truth. In this version, the one causing pain bears no blame because they've done their best, were always pushed, or don't know what else to do. Meanwhile, the partner who expressed feelings, asked questions, and sought reconnection is painted as the one who weighed the relationship down. A key feature of this mechanism is the reframing of inappropriate behavior. For example, if someone begins texting intimately with someone else, instead of admitting fault or acknowledging emotional distance, they say, "If you weren't so cold, I wouldn't have looked elsewhere for attention." Here, emotional betrayal is justified by blaming the other's shortcomings. Lack of understanding, care, or emotional maturity on your part becomes their excuse for wrongdoing. In doing so, the person at fault avoids accountability and shifts the burden of repair to the injured party. Once this continues long enough, the manipulated person may internalize the blame and believe they're the reason the relationship is falling apart. They feel responsible for saving it, try harder, smooth things over, and in many cases, tolerate unhealthy behavior just to keep things from breaking. This is when gaslighting is most effective. It not only distorts shared reality, but robs the victim of objective perspective on the relationship itself. What's striking is that this role reversal rarely takes the form of obvious psychological abuse. The manipulator doesn't need to yell or insult, just sustain a haze of ambiguity using half-truth logic that traps the other in self-doubt. Phrases like, "I just want you to grow up," "You always think negatively," or "I'm not sure we're on the same wavelength," may sound reasonable, but carry the hidden message: you are the problem, and they are simply reacting. This tactic doesn't just harm the current relationship. It leaves lasting effects on self-esteem and emotional boundaries. After repeated role reversals, victims often begin to doubt all future emotional instincts. They hesitate to speak up, fear setting limits, and frequently self-correct, even when they've done nothing wrong. This makes them more vulnerable to future manipulation. In essence, reshaping reality to protect misconduct is a dangerous extension of gaslighting. It allows the one inflicting harm to escape guilt by assigning blame to the hurt party, distorting communication, and causing the other to lose not only trust in the relationship, but in themselves. Once roles are reversed, every attempt at connection becomes twisted, and the relationship is no longer built on sincerity, but on a one-sided negotiation where one defines reality and the other struggles to survive within it. Throughout the journey of facing emotional detachment, subtle changes, or even gaslighting in a relationship, one lesson I've learned from Stoicism remains constant. We cannot control the behavior of others, but we can absolutely control how we respond. It's not easy to stay rational when someone you love steadily creates distance and quietly shifts the blame onto you. But when emotion takes full control, we're easily pulled into two extremes: resentment or self-blame. Both lead to the same outcome: losing our inner sovereignty. So when I sense that I'm being gradually pushed out of a relationship, instead of clinging, I've learned to stop and observe. Instead of asking, "Why have they changed?" I ask, "Am I responding as someone who governs their own mind, or as someone led by emotion?" This isn't indifference. It is clarity within grief, a core virtue of the Stoic spirit. We do not stay to beg for love that has already left. We stay with ourselves, with dignity, with clarity, and with the courage to walk away when needed. Because in the end, the greatest freedom is this: refusing to let someone's silence or manipulation distort the truth of your worth. Let their silence remind you of one thing: you deserve a connection that is honest, without concealment, without manipulation, without begging. And if this journey asks you to let go, then let go with self-respect, not resentment. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next reflection. And remember, dignity doesn't lie in being kept. It lies in how we choose to walk away. See you in the next video.